The last thing we have to do inside of our snippet edit form is allow a user to save a change code snippet. So we need to add a button in here or something like that. Whenever a user clicks on it, we're going to save our snippet to the database. Whenever we talk about saving or changing data, remember, we're going to always try to do that by using a server action. I want to very quickly give you a reminder on server actions, just because it's been a couple of videos before we have used one. Our previous server action that we have implemented is inside the src app snippets new page.tsx file. Here it is right here. So it's our snippet create page. To define a server action, we write out an async function and then put the string useServer at the very top. Then inside of a server action, we're usually going to do the same kind of things. We're usually going to do a little bit of validation. Right now, we're actually not doing any, but we will add some in later on. We then save or update some data, and then we're very often going to redirect the user back to some other page in our application. So that is the server action we put together already. And I would love to be able to use this exact same pattern on our snippet edit form, the component we are working on right now, but unfortunately, it's not going to work out. Let me tell you why that is. Okay, so here is the crux of the issue that we're going to run into here. We are not allowed to define server actions in client components. And our snippet edit form, the component we are working on right now, that is a client component, is making use of state, event handlers, hooks, and so on. And most importantly, we've got that use client directive at the very top. So if we try to define a server action inside this client component, we're going to end up seeing an error message. This is definitely an error you're going to run into at some point in time. So let's go ahead and try to make a server action inside of our client component and just see the error message, just so you can see it and understand it when you probably eventually see it at some point in time on your own personal projects. All right, so back inside of snippet edit form, underneath the event handler, I'm going to put in a server action by making an async function called edit snippet, and I'll put in that string of useServer in there like so. Now, if we save this and flip back over to the browser, there's our error message. It's going to tell us very plainly, sorry, but you cannot define a server action in a client component. But it does give us some workarounds right here. So let's take a look at some diagrams and understand how we can still use a server action inside of a client component, because the only restriction is we can't define the server action in a client component. We can make use of them in a client component, we just can't define them in here. So there's two options that we're going to look at. And again, this is where we want to use a server action in a client component. In option number one, we can define a server action in a parent server component and then pass it as a prop to our client component. So in our case, here's our component hierarchy. We've got our snippet edit page, and that is a server component. Inside there, we could define our server action and then pass it down as a prop to our snippet edit form. So now our snippet edit form down here will receive the snippet prop that we're already passing down, in addition to maybe some prop that we also call onSubmit or something like that. Then inside of our snippet edit form, we are free to call that function right there, that server action. And that's pretty much it. It's going to run the server action. Now, as a reminder, usually server components cannot pass event handlers down to client components. That's one of the big restrictions around server components. This is the kind of one exception to that. The one exception is that we are allowed to pass down server actions from a server component to a client. Okay, so this is option number one. Let's now take a look at option number two. Option number two, we can define a separate file inside of our project and then define one or more server actions inside there. So maybe inside of a new file inside of our project called something like actions.ts, we can make a server action or multiple server actions if we want to. We can then export that and then very simply import it into our client component and call it. When we make a standalone file like this, we don't have to put useServer at the top of every individual function we define inside of here. Instead, we can just write out one single useServer string at the very top of the file. When we put that in, all the different functions we export from this file will be exported as server actions. Now, me personally, I really like option number two. And the reason for that is super simple. It allows me to put a lot of these different server actions into one file inside of my code base. So if I ever want to understand all the different server actions that exist, Well, I got this one file that contains them all. And of course, if I want to, I can define these server actions in separate files just for a little bit better organization. In addition, this approach leads to a lot easier code reuse because we can reuse the same server actions in multiple different components. Now, again, it's totally up to you in what approach you take. And there is a couple of scenarios where option number one actually is going to be pretty nice. We'll see examples of that later on, specifically when we start dealing with lists. But for right now, I think we'll go with option number two, just to get some experience with defining server actions in separate files. Okay, so now we understand this. We got a path to go forward. We're going to make this separate file in just a moment.